I know we did this on somewhat short notice.
Yes, sorry I'm late. We had a Tongan Day proclamation that ran a little long.
As in Tonga,
The kingdom, yes,
Yeah.
the kingdom island. It was lovely.
Is there a reason for it being this day? I mean, is
It's,
Tonga Independence Day and I don't know that?
I think it's Tongan month, and we needed to, scoot that in just under the wire.
You made it by one day.
It happened.
So thank you for coming in. We wanted to start big picture. Obviously, some things have come up in the news that made us want to talk to you, but
I have no idea what you're talking about.
but I want to start with I think you're people who are avid supporters of yours, and also some people who are critics agree that you're somebody with a real vision for what Portland should be, and that has been something that has been missing at City Hall. Like, there's a lot of gripes, sometimes talking about mayors in the past, but can you talk about key successes you've had in delivering on your vision for what you want Portland to be?
Yeah, let me recalibrate my brain a little bit, though, because I was not coming in here prepared to talk about big picture. I did think I was going to be fielding lots of questions about specific issues coming up in the media. So the question is not so much what my vision is, but what I've been able to accomplish toward it. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, tenant protections are a big part of that. The relocation ordinance and the fair ordinance, and progress we've been able to make at the state level. I'm someone who I don't like to take credit for things that I don't know I absolutely deserve, and I don't like receiving credit, but as someone who was involved in the housing justice movement for at least a couple years before I came to City Hall, any conversation about rent control or really any meaningful tenant protections at the state level were just dismissed out of hand. No one was interested in it. No one recognized it as really an urgent issue. And I know that because of changes we've made, for better, for worse, our state legislature has been inspired to make their own. Sometimes it feels like a good thing, and sometimes it feels like they're trying to beat us to the punch. But I would say overturning the preemption on just cause evictions was a real victory, and the anti-gouging measure, not letting landlords raise rents more than 10% in a year, while it doesn't really deliver relief to anyone who's suffering now, and it didn't make any difference for Portlanders really, because we already had the relocation ordinance. Sorry, it's not 10%, it's 7% plus CPI. Yeah, so I'm kind of averaging at 10, it might be 12, I think 12 this year. That will protect renters outside of the city of Portland, because we know we have a housing crisis throughout the metro region, but also throughout the state. And I think it's worse than we realize.
So you ran on rent control as something you wanted to see implemented, and yes, the landscape has completely changed the political landscape has completely changed. Is rent control still something you believe Portland needs?
That's a good question. I think because we've been forced to work within the constraints put on us by state law, that hasn't really been and we have been told over and over again that we won't get that ban overturned. We really have just focused our attention on other solutions. So to be honest, I haven't I have, like, I mean, for instance, I'm not working on any kind of policy around rent control. I think we have implemented some of the strongest protections that we can, given the constraints placed on us by the state. And now I'm not sure what they're calling RIP now, housing opportunity,
They changed the name, they're no longer calling it?
Oh, I hope I wasn't. Yeah, it's going to change. I think everyone agreed that RIP was a unfortunate name to begin with.
Kind of morbid.
Yeah, just a little. RIP. I mean, they just basically teed it up for the opposition. I can see the logos and slogans already. We are focused on conversations around zoning and supply and how we're going to deliver the number of units and the kind of units that we desperately need.
When is that expected to get? By the end of this year or early next year?
There's a work session in 10 days.
Yeah, there's a work session. And it may be coming late this year.
It sort of feels like the city's slow walking this.
Maybe just a little, Mark. Yeah. I mean, when I got there, I was really excited to talk about RIP, and everyone else was, that I talked to was just like, oh no, we don't want to, And I think it's gone through a few iterations since I've been there, and I've pretty steadfastly said I will not support it if it appears that it's going to drive demolition and displacement. And as it stands, and I have to admit I haven't read the full final proposal. As it stands, I don't see. The biggest issue I see with it is that it's not going to deliver benefit to average Portlanders, average homeowners, because we can change the zoning and let you do a internal division or build an ADU or two, but the average homeowner doesn't have the capital to do that. So I'm really concerned that because of that, the only benefit that an average or low-income homeowner can reap is selling their property to a developer who's going to tear the house down and build something unaffordable.
I've been talking to a bunch of developers about RIP, thinking they'd be very excited. Every 4,700 square foot lot in the city, if it goes through, you'll be able to put a fourplex on, with some conditions. And every developer who does this for a living says, I'm not interested. It's too small for me to make any money.
Yeah, interesting.
So they said if you're a homeowner and you want to take the risk on your own, there's probably a real upside. But I was, I guess, a little bit surprised to hear that.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised to hear that too, although I know that some constraints have been put on new buildings that make it maybe a little less attractive to the kinds of developers who are coming in and tearing down old homes and building giant new ones. So I've been hell-bent on coming up with some kind of loan product that an average homeowner could access.
You're aware of what Patrick Quinton is doing?
He is with...
Well, he's the former Prosper Portland.
Yeah.
He's now building ADUs. He'll build an ADU and pay for it.
Yes.
And do a revenue share.
I'm aware of that. We've been talking to Robert Liberty and Craft 3. I mean, we're talking to everyone who's in kind of the ADU market. What we want to see is pretty simple. We want homeowners to be able to take into account the revenue they would get from building that one or two ADUs, which will allow more people access to adequate funding to build ADUs. It's pretty simple. It's taken me a really long time to sell the mayor on it because he thought I was proposing a subprime loan product, which I'm not. This is people who are, I know I have multiple friends that would love to build ADUs. They have higher than average income, and unless you have access to $150,000, $200,000 you're not going to be able to build one. So the concern is we change the zoning. Like I said, it could drive demolition. Maybe lots of rich people build yoga studios in their backyards or their hobby Airbnbs. I don't, but the people who really need it won't have access.
So, Commissioner, going back to the shed before you ran for office, you identified
Back to the shed.
you identified price as a problem.
Yeah.
And that was really a proxy for there not being enough supply.
Mm-hmm.
So price went up. You've done a whole lot, as you listed, with FAIR and with a variety of tenant protections, relocation costs, and so on, to improve the conditions for renters. But I'm wondering what you would say you've done in terms of trying to bring price down or stabilize price or increase supply.
Well, this falls under the category of not wanting to take credit for things that I'm not entirely sure I deserve credit for, but there have been market studies that suggest that the combination of increased supply of rental units in Portland and our local regulations has led to a very significant drop in annual rent increases, and probably a smaller drop at certain levels of the market in rents actually coming down a little. Of course, people who are already cost burdened are very unlikely to receive a notice of rent reduction, although I have heard, anecdotally, a few stories from renters negotiating with their landlords, because landlords have been relying on things like Zillow, for instance, instead of doing their own market research in their neighborhood. Zillow, without even knowing the condition of the home, will tell them, you could charge $2,000 a month for this unit. Some of those prices have dropped, and now tenants are starting to use tools like that and show their landlord, look, you're charging me $200 more than what this, national platform says the market rate should be for the home. So that is a impact we've had on rents. As far as supply goes, I'm very supportive of inclusionary zoning. I've been, I have to admit, 2.5 years, I think over 1,500 items have crossed the dais, just the things that have come to council. So it may be hard for me to enumerate off the top of my head all of the ordinances that I've supported over the last 2.5 years, but there have been multiple occasions where, for instance, I've supported height limits to add units. Like I said, we've been working on this loan product, which not everyone is a fan of ADUs, but I see them as a really low impact way to increase our rental inventory. They're relatively affordable just by virtue of being smaller units. And they don't change neighborhood character, which is a concern for some people.
Is there a city, either in this country or elsewhere in the world, that in your mind is sort of a paradigm for the way in which a city both provides appropriate renter protection and incentives for affordable housing, and a city that's doing it right that you look to and say, here's what we ought to model our policies after?
No.
Not one?
No.
There's no...
Well,
there's no map out there?
I probably on a weekly basis, a friend or a constituent will send me an article about how another American city is doing better at eliminating homelessness, or a city in Europe is doing better with rent control and affordable housing. And I can't use European cities as a model that have been investing in public housing for decades or centuries in some cases, and have a really strong ethic around protecting renters. So I could say, Amsterdam has great protections. Berlin put caps on units depending on their sizes. There's lots of, I think, strategies and solutions that I could kind of pick, but I can't. Those models aren't realistic models, because I will not live long enough to see the kind of investment we would need from our federal government in public housing to reach that goal.
Not a very hopeful thought. Nobody's doing it right.
And I'll say nationally, we have a national housing crisis, and there's just an inherent conflict between a bank account built out of wood and brick or whatever your house is made out of, and housing for people. And no, I don't think that anyone is doing a great job at all of it. You'll see, and it also gets very confusing. I had a friend send me an article last week about how Salt Lake City has eliminated homelessness, essentially.
I get that one like once a week.
Dear God. And,
They haven't, by the way.
they absolutely haven't. And we have to start with, well, what's your definition of homeless? In this case, it was chronically homeless. So these are people who have a disability, a drug addiction, a mental health issue or challenge, and they've been living on the street, not in a shelter, not doubled up with friends, on the street for a year, not consecutively, but cumulatively, they've been homeless and living on the street for at least a year. That's generally a pretty small portion of the homeless population. In Portland, I think we estimate that to be around 2,000 people. It's a city of a different size, different resources. So I'm on a national committee through Local Progress that is trying to develop a housing and tenant protection, national housing and tenant protection strategy. And I'm also working with a small group of people locally with Congressman Blumenauer on these similar issues. And I just did a conference call today, and there were people from all over the country, progressive electeds from all over the country, and we are all dealing with a housing challenge and a homelessness challenge, and we are all working in somewhat unique environments because the laws vary so much state by state.
What's the biggest impediment to creating more housing in the city?
Money, whether it's having the money to build the houses or the political power that comes with money that allows people to exclude or fight affordable developments.
That feels like a good segue into a subject that's been in the news.
Oh boy.
What?
Oh boy.
So, why do you want to make changes to the neighborhood association system in Portland?
Well, number one, it's not just me that wants to make changes to the neighborhood system, which has existed for 45 years, and for 40 years have been talking about this challenge around diversity and equity in their own system. Two, I inherited a bureau that had been audited shortly before I came to office that really highlighted the inequities and the fact that the code and standards were outdated and that we were not serving all Portlanders equitably. And three, while it may not be evident because we've heard so much from critics and opponents, there is a considerable amount of demand and support for this change. This process has been really challenging. few people are really willing to wade into the minutia of city code, administrative rules, the city charter.
Of all the issues that you've taken on at the city, is this the one that's proving the most controversial?
Well, it may be.
Were you,
Ask me after it comes to council, if it comes to council.
well, but up until this point, were you surprised? Have you been surprised? Or did
Yeah,
you know that
absolutely.
You were surprised.
I'm surprised I'm surprised and I'm disappointed because there's a handful of people, you know, I think
And
there's.
just to be clear, you're surprised and you're disappointed that neighborhood associations have reacted so
Well, I don't.
firmly, or
So-
what is it?
Okay, Mark. That's like 3 questions. How this has unfolded to me, it's just kind of an illustration of what's wrong with the system, because we have a handful of very vocal opponents spreading misinformation and rumors and theories about what we're doing well in advance of it ever being finalized. We don't have a daily paper of record. We don't, you know, it's not lost on me that we are having a real challenge with civic engagement and public outreach on this issue, and it's the Bureau charged with civic engagement. It's just a very challenging environment. So what's surprising to me, I don't want to make blanket statements about neighborhood associations because these are individuals, not necessarily whole neighborhood associations, and there's also several who are supporting us, who support code change. And before people started getting riled up by the news coverage, we were out there talking to neighborhood associations about code change and not getting a lot of negative feedback or serious concerns. So it's frustrating and disappointing that so much time is being taken up just trying to dispel myths and misunderstandings, and that we really haven't gotten to the heart of the matter, which is that we have to serve all Portlanders. Neighborhood associations are not serving all Portlanders.
But, I mean, that's an accurate statement.
Mhm.
You believe that.
Mm-hmm.
It's my understanding that that's not a misunderstanding. That's a correct understanding of your attitude about this. So what's the misunderstanding about your position?
Oh, that I'm dismantling the neighborhood system and destroying democracy. Those
Let's
are the top.
separate the destroying democracy part. But you are in effect, for reasons you have stated quite clearly, trying to weaken the influence of neighborhood associations. That's not quite dismantling, but that is in fact your goal, because you believe they speak for a class of people that is not nearly as inclusive as it ought to be if we want the city to be the city we want it to be.
So do you, I mean, I guess I wouldn't characterize it in the negative terms you're using
I
because,
think those are negative, but okay.
well, weakening. Like, would you consider having to give airspace to someone who's not like you, weakening your position? And would you feel comfortable continuing to assert privilege that's being extended to you, that's being denied to other groups for no legitimate reason?
Correct, and if your analysis is that these are groups that have been given a privilege that they don't deserve, and you want to take that away from them,
That's not my analysis. That's not my analysis. I'm not saying they don't deserve the privilege. I'm saying everyone deserves the privilege. And I'm not taking away from them. I want to give it to other people. But I do want to say that we assembled this code change committee. I walked into the room and was overwhelmed by the kind of minds and talents in that room, and that they were willing to volunteer their time to something so tedious sounding as a code change committee. I welcomed them and I walked out the door, and I have had zero involvement with code change. They were not given any kind of they were not given specific instructions. They're not there to serve my interests. They're there to represent communities that have been underrepresented in neighborhood associations for 45 years, although we also had current and former neighborhood association members as well. So, I was, rereading, I reread Gordon's article, highlighted the numerous things that were false in that article, and one of them was, I'm not going to quite remember the words, but something about, Eudaly's plan or Eudaly's agenda. This is not my plan. This is the result of months of work by a diverse group of community members, the Code Change Committee, and it's what they're recommending to me. Up until a couple weeks ago, the final vote was fairly recent. And now I have to reflect on it, add my own, I already have added language to it that they agreed to, that final section in the code change. Lobby my colleagues, consider amendments from them. This is a process, and it's just, I think the fact that it's been just scrutinized so much and criticized so much before the final proposal, was ever created is tough. I'll say previously, obviously the tenant protection stuff was challenging. I've taken a lot of heat for my stance on defending immigrant and refugee communities. That's, some of the most...
You've taken a lot of heat
from
for neighborhood associations?
Oh, no. I'm saying,
other...
because the question was, is this the hardest thing? And I'm just thinking back, probably the most kind of vile responses I've received. They're often not from constituents. It's just you get trolled by...
Right. But this is because of your desire to... This is in response to you doing what?
Supporting Sanctuary City, fighting for universal defense, speaking out on behalf of, in defense of immigrant and refugee communities. I'm just thinking back.
But
even that was not as controversial as code change.
So could you give us a couple of examples? Your question, Mark, about if somebody didn't have any error. So what are a couple of concrete examples of the harms that groups are currently excluded from the neighborhood association process?
Or from the civic life process.
Civic life process. What tangible harms are they suffering?
Well, I think anytime you have a group that's in the minority, they are going to have unique needs and challenges that the general population may not understand. And I think of that relative to my experience of being a parent of a child with a disability. I think neighborhood associations are very well intentioned. I celebrate their contribution to the city over the last 45 years. I appreciate, or I understand having limited resources, being entirely volunteer run. There is a limit to what they can accomplish, but I challenge this notion that some people have asserted, which is that this group is open to anyone. And if they're not coming, it's a failure on their part. And that's a real lack of understanding.
Neighborhood associations.
Yeah, that's a real lack of understanding of how marginalized and excluded certain communities feel. For one thing, people with disabilities, and this is not a specific example, I will try to get to that. If you try to attend an event and you are a wheelchair user and there are steps, it is inaccessible, how many times are you going to come back to that venue or try to go to that event? If you speak English as a second language and you can't keep up with a fast-paced conversation, how many times are you going to go back and feel like you can't participate and you can't contribute? If you're a renter and you sense a prevailing attitude in a neighborhood association that renters are a scourge of the neighborhood, that renters shouldn't, and this is real, renters shouldn't get to vote because they're not invested in our neighborhood. These are attitudes that exist. I'm not saying...
Or if you've lived in a neighborhood for more than a year and you're a renter and you still haven't received a single invite to your neighborhood association.
There's that, yeah, thanks for raising that. I mean, here's a simple...
That actually has happened to me.
Yeah.
They clearly don't want you there.
Oh, no. I would raise hell.
What neighborhood do you...
Northwest District Association.
Oh, lucky
They don't
you.
want me there, but I'm going.
Yay, Aaron! I attended my first Woodlawn Neighborhood Association meeting, which is where I live, and it's a really lovely group of people. And it's, I think, a great model of what a neighborhood association could be. Cully is another example of a really inclusive association.
I was going to ask, which are the neighborhood associations that you said just a few minutes ago were supporting you?
I don't have the list. I know there's about 8 that have
Is
officially...
Cully
Cully's one of them, yeah. Yeah, I don't think we've taken an official, tally, but Cully is, members of Cully Neighborhood Association have spoken out. So I'm not going to name the neighborhood association, but I know there was an association in a historically African-American community with a high number of renters, and the way they send out announcements for their neighborhood associations is to, and I think because it's free or cheap, thanks to the city, is to put their flyers in the trash and recycling circular. Well, the only people that get that are homeowners. I'm not saying it's some nefarious plot to exclude renters. I think it's because it's cheap and it's easy, but we can't be satisfied with that.
I think you're saying that neighborhood associations is an inexact, imprecise, and in some cases unequal voice that has a fair amount of authority. And I think you're correct, but I'm troubled by, not troubled, I'm just puzzled by, why back off of the fact that you do think they have too much influence at City Hall and you are trying to lessen their influence? Why would you, I don't understand why you'd back off.
I think it's just the terms that
So
you couched
pick
it
your
in.
verb. If it's not weaken, what is it?
Let me draw the parallel actually. 'Cause
Yeah.
This is something that come up not today in our conversation in preparation for this, but when you have brought up renter protections, it's been clear that you're going to represent the interest of renters over landlords. Like you're willing to make that choice in your policies.
Mm-hmm.
But on this, it was more striking actually in an interview your bureau director did, where it's like, nobody has to get upset here. You know what I mean? Like there's no trade-off. Is there a reason you're not talking about a trade-off here?
Yeah.
I don't would you shy from saying that you passed a policy that is going to benefit tenants over landlords? And I'm just wondering, here, why be so careful? Does it mean that does it mean the neighborhood associations are a more powerful lobby at City Hall than
this is what
than
I'll
the
say,
landlords are?
because this is apples and oranges. There is an inherent power imbalance between a landlord and a tenant, and Oregon has allowed open season on tenants for decades. The state and the city have been favoring landlords by preempting on just cause evictions and by banning rent control and by having such vague rules around a host of other landlord-tenant policies. My work in that arena is to try to protect tenants during a declared housing crisis, a housing crisis that's been going on since 2010, and to try to make that power imbalance a little less dramatic. In this instance, there's also a power imbalance between neighborhood associations and organizations and communities that choose to identify in other ways, whether it's around identity or an issue. And that has been built into our system, written into our code. And in this case, I guess I'm struggling with the way you're framing it, which is that we're taking something away from neighborhood associations.
That you're arguing, and I think a lot of people would agree, they shouldn't have had to begin with. That they represent property owners, they don't represent tenants, that they are the biggest advocates of NIMBYism. I don't know if you remember the whole Phil Morford incident. I mean, that was basically a neighborhood association.
Phil Morford?
Yeah, he built the first row houses in the city.
Yeah.
Basically a neighborhood association.
Oh, Northwest. Yeah.
Yeah, they literally arsoned the thing.
I mean, to be fair, I was a teenager when that happened.
Right.
But, I do remember it. I lived in Northwest
LC
Portland.
at that time, which is very close to the.
Yeah, for a whole semester. So I
understand that weaken may be the wrong word, but
I guess
clearly, your goal clearly is to say, I'm trying to level a field that I think is unlevel, and neighborhood associations, I think, have too loud of a megaphone. The next question is, so what happened? I mean, a couple of people have said to me, well, then, we're definitely, Chloe must favor a district form of government, right? Because that's how you give voice to the voiceless. No? Have you thought about that at all?
I mean, number one, to me, the charter and the form of city government and the code change for civic life are two completely separate districts. I would not be remotely, I would never propose, well, let's just get rid of neighborhood associations and have one person representing an entire district, not a neighborhood, but a dozen or more neighborhoods. That would not solve this problem. I am really interested in the conversation about changing our form of government. I see pros and cons to our commission form of government. I have to say it's the only thing I've ever known because I've lived here my whole life. Similar to code change, this conversation has been going on for decades, and there have been various attempts at changing the form of city government and changing the code, and both have failed, either at the ballot box or at the community organizing level. I think the challenge with districts in Portland is we don't have a single district that's minority majority. So there's no guarantee, although it would be a cheaper campaign, an easier campaign. I think we would get more diverse candidates and they would have a better shot at winning. There's no guarantee we see a significant change in who ultimately gets elected and gets that seat.
Can I ask one more question?
So right now you're undecided on changing the commission form of government. Yay, nay, or undecided, I guess, is what's your bottom line at the moment on?
I mean, there's a fourth answer, which is I think there needs to be change. I don't know that I've seen a model for it that appeals to me. Like, for one thing, maybe a combination of districts and at-large would work, because I'm concerned districts are once again going to privilege homeowners, because if you can't guarantee that you remain in your district, you get elected in one district and then you get evicted from your rental home and you're displaced and forced out of your district, then you don't get to run for that seat again. So I find that a little problematic. Not that every renter should just be at large, but there are still some deeper, I think, like fairness and equity questions that need to be explored. And it's Portland. Could we invent our own form of city government?
So I know you want to move past neighborhood associations because we have other questions.
I will talk about it till the
Well, I have
cows
one-
come home.
I have one more question.
Okay.
Related. What does Alan Clausen have wrong?
Let's go over what Alan Clausen has said. He called you, I was thinking of him as a,
preparing. I had no idea you were going to prepare.
I'm glad you're prepared because I don't actually read anything that Alan Clausen writes.
Okay.
So
fair
I
enough.
wouldn't have been able to answer Mark's question.
So he's, I'm sure you know him as a leading local editorial voice in favor of neighborhood associations, but
Do I? Yes. I think he's been
called-
doing it longer than I've maybe.
That was
I'm
a
49.
That was a Mariah Carey. I don't know her.
Rachel, what is he
but
saying?
he called you a demagogue who basically
Oh boy.
needlessly divides people,
Okay.
along class lines particularly, and that you're using, he defined demagogue as somebody who's using popular prejudices to advance your own power.
Wow.
What would you say to that?
Well, he should have a conversation with my Trump supporter cousin who approached me at a family funeral and told me what a great job he thought I was doing on Portland City Council.
How did that make you feel?
Alarmed. I think the exact words is, I've been watching you up there and, you're doing a great job. I see you weighing both sides and trying to, come up with reasonable solutions, which is true. I'm often not making either side happy in a lot of other conversations, such as car advocates and bicyclists. I'm trying to do the most good for the most people that I can do. I mean, of course, my vision far outstrips what is actually possible being one member of city council. What did he, and I said, Pat, I thank you. I hate to burst your bubble, but I'm about as far left as you can be without just dropping off the page altogether. But and it shook me a little.
So
wait, why should Alan Clausen talk to your cousin?
Because he's a Trump supporter who thinks that I'm a reasonable politician.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Well, I walk past News Seasons every day to get some kind of snack, mostly Dr. Pepper at this point.
Okay.
But as I walk past, yeah, sure. Definitely using our time well here. But as I walk past the Northwest Examiner every day, and every month there's a new cartoon on the cover, and this month it compared you and Portland City Hall to like Tiananmen Square running over people with tanks.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
That was the nicer cartoon of the two.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what is it about the policy that City Hall is currently pursuing inside the Office of Civic Life that threatens some establishment figures so much?
Yeah.
Like, and I'm asking this not with an agenda because I actually don't know what crawled up his ass and died.
And we're getting to the kind of surprising part of this process. I actually thought I had a decent shot as a now middle-class, middle-aged white woman talking to other people about privilege. I want our city to be fair and equitable and inclusive. I want to serve all of my constituents as well as I can. I cannot do that if the vast majority, well, I shouldn't say, when you tally it all up, tally these communities all up, they probably are in the majority. And they don't have the same kind of voice. They're not engaged. I mean, when I had BDS, I required notices to be sent to everyone, not just homeowners. And I've just hammered on this the whole time I've been in City Hall. Don't tell me you've done public engagement if it's sending out notices to property owners. That is not public engagement, that's property owner engagement. And so I spoke at this event. It was a beautiful art exhibit with the unfortunate name of Neighborhood Associations Rock. And each section was devoted to a different neighborhood association and kind of notable cause they had gotten behind, and it started with the Mount Hood Highway, and more recently the Superfund cleanup. And I stood up in front of this packed room of virtually all white people over the age of 50, and acknowledged the successes, acknowledged the contributions, listed off half a dozen of these fights that I directly participated in, or as an activist or supported on city council, as a way to show all the things that we have in common. And then I talked about a few other things we have in common. We're almost all white. I said we make above average incomes. That just freaked everyone out in the room, because of course somehow everyone in America thinks they're middle class and that they're poorer than they really are, except for actual poor people who are painfully aware of how poor they are, and that, I'm pushing the 50 and up demographic. And then I talked about who wasn't in the room. And dear God, I was interrupted, insulted, mocked, yelled at.
You were heckled at the event.
Oh, absolutely.
I heard audio of that was
Yeah.
actually sent to me to indicate the opposite, that you had interrupted them. And I was like, what is happening
I
here?
was asked to deliver a speech.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah, I wasn't asked to field a Q&A afterwards. I wasn't asked to provide a opportunity for audience participation. It was this absolute setup, and I walked out of there extremely disappointed. I had dinner plans that night, and I sat at dinner and cried, because it was just not because of what they were saying or that they didn't agree with me. It just incredibly stressful to be standing in front of a room of people emanating hate towards you, which is largely, I think, based on misunderstanding, but maybe not. I mean, to your question,
Orchestrated the setup.
I don't remember the person's name, but we could get that to you. He's a neighborhood association member, and he may own the gallery. It kind of seemed like he owned the gallery in the Pearl.
So, with all
Jimmy?
due respect, have you answered Aaron's question?
I was just about to.
Oh,
Yeah. I have the same question. What are they afraid of? How do they think their neighborhoods are going to suffer by giving equal voice to communities of color, immigrants and refugees, renters, people with disabilities? I mean, young people who tend to not participate in neighborhood associations. I mean, the other, they feel attacked, they feel criticized. I'm not telling them that they're bad or they have to change or the whole system should go away, but it's just one way to organize and identify, and it's clear that it's not the way that most Portlanders want to engage with the city. And I think it's incumbent upon me as an elected representative to meet people where they are, and they are largely not at their neighborhood associations. I'm still willing to meet those community members who are. I've never, I think one of the things I said at that meeting was, I'm not here to burn your house down. I am here to build a bigger table. I just don't understand.
so
To be clear about your word of setup, what do you mean? Do you think that people came in there with the idea that they would challenge whatever you said to them, or do you think it was
I think that it was presented to my staff and mayor's staff as this, fun community event. And they filled it with, angry villagers with torches and pitchforks. There were a couple people in the room that, at least a couple, I mean, I don't know how many, because none of them spoke up, because no one that didn't agree with them would feel comfortable speaking up in that forum. And that's another thing that was hard. It was hard to stand there with no support, and including the man who organized it, who certainly should have intervened at some point.
Who's that?
Remember, I can't remember his name, but we can get that for you.
So we can
Yeah.
keep moving on time.
Yes.
Let's talk about some of the subjects.
I do want to say one more thing though, because I said, I went home, I had to just kind of like decompress and let it out. And then I realized that was hard, but it's an important part of my job. And if I got a little taste of what it's like to be a member of a marginalized, underrepresented group, good. That's good for me. It didn't discourage me at all. It made me realize that we have a lot of work to do if we want to bring along the neighborhood associate or more of the neighborhood associations, but it didn't discourage me at all.
What's been your hardest day at work? Maybe that
You're
one.
trying to make me cry.
Look, you have shared on social media how difficult the job is.
Yeah,
You have a very compelling and challenging personal narrative. You're a single
Yeah.
mom with a kid. I
Yeah.
just can only begin to imagine the pressures on you. You walked into this job, first elected position.
yeah.
I'm just wondering.
I think
Is it going to be easier to ask you what was your best day?
no, just give me a minute, Mark. The day of the Max attack
Mhm.
was early on. The first day I walked into council, Commissioner Fish said, "Welcome, Commissioner Eudaly, you're the president of the council." And I thought I was being hazed because there is no onboarding. I think there is now because I've complained about it so much. There's no onboarding. They give you a briefing book of, a little summary of every bureau, but they don't give you a copy of, there's an assumption that everyone knows parliamentary process. But it was true. It was my turn to be president of the council. And so when the Max stabbings occurred, the mayor was in the air over the Atlantic Ocean, and I had to stand in his place until he was able to return. And what made it even harder is that one of the victims was an employee in my bureau. Rick Best was in the permitting office at BDS. And more recently, one of my bureau staff lost their father in the El Paso shooting. So, I could almost say the worst day was the night I got elected, which
Okay, we'll go with that.
I describe it as the best
You mean
and
in
worst.
retrospect?
Yeah,
What's the worst?
no.
Or at
In
the
that
time?
moment, minutes before my election was called, it was announced that Donald Trump was our president,
Oh.
which I didn't think in a million years was going to happen. I thought it was some kind of cruel joke. And as I'm in the back, the green room at Holocene, trying to compose my thoughts because I hadn't prepared an acceptance or a, what's it called when you don't win? I don't know. That's concession speech. I thought, wow, I need to go out there and give these people some hope because something horrible has just happened to our country. And I hear this massive cheer go up, and I think, oh, thank God they were wrong. Like, she must have swept Massachusetts. I don't know. This isn't happening. And then someone ran in the room and said, Chloe, I think you just won. And it was just a surreal moment where I thought, I have my own criticisms of President Obama, but we were able to make a lot of progressive change with that president in office. And I thought that I would be riding that wave, not defending my community the environment, immigrants and refugees. I mean, it's just been unbelievably hard. But I think when the kind of hate-fueled racist violence has directly touched us at City Hall has been the hardest.
The obvious segue here is August 17th. So the most recent wandering in of the Proud Boys, the American Guard, and some other unpleasant people.
Yeah.
I will just also pop in here to say we are at about an hour. So just
We'll
think about
ask
maybe
quick
some final
questions and
questions.
Yeah.
go for quick answers.
I'm all right.
Okay.
This is fun. This is way
Good.
more fun than I thought it would be. I don't
It's
get.
about to get really bad. You got 2 minutes.
Damn it.
Turn the lights down.
I guess my question on the Proud Boys, I have two, but let's start with this one. Did the mayor and the police bureau handle this round better than previous exercises in protests that you've criticized?
I think the answer is yes. I think I understand that the mayor and the police chief may need to, especially the police chief, may need to take a more neutral stance than I'm willing to do. I think that the gathering of other electeds and community leaders to, present a unified voice against hate was helpful to the community. I see people I know on social media who are smart, engaged people asking why the mayor keeps letting these people come to Portland. And I just wonder how they think we can stop them. I mean, I have wished that those interstate bridges were under PBOT control and I'd just pull a Chris Christie and they couldn't come across. But I would never do that. And they don't belong to PBOT. I mean, I think his own city would prefer that he, not be there. But Commissioner Hardesty was able to observe the whole operation, which I think was so helpful because my experience of those events are either on the ground at the event. I sometimes go to the protests. I didn't go to this one. I had my son that weekend, and I didn't have childcare, and there was no way I was bringing him down and possibly putting him in harm's way. Now that I saw how it unfolded, I really wish we had gone because he would have loved the banana brigade. So I see it from the ground, which is overwhelming, confusing. You're only getting a small picture of what is happening, and how and why the police are responding the way they are. So I think it was very helpful to have Commissioner Hardesty there to share with the public. She's someone who's very trusted on matters pertaining to police, kind of singing their praises and how well they did at de-escalating and really avoiding as much intervening in violence as possible.
This next question is my follow on this, and I admit I don't have an answer on this.
Yeah.
The Proud Boys out of Florida, I don't remember their names, honestly. I do not remember any names. But these guys say they're going to come back every month, and they're essentially holding the city hostage, saying unless you take our political position and jail our enemies, we will come back and use your resources. What on earth response can City Hall have to that?
That's Joe Biggs who said that. I have a choice photograph of Mr. Biggs cowering in a gazebo in a public park in Boston, where Proud Boys came and did their thing, and 20,000 Bostonians came out to oppose them. And his quote was something to the effect of, "We're waiting to see if we're going to get police escort out of here. This is America." And my response, because I reposted it, was like, "You're right, Joe, this is America, where not only racists have freedom of speech." I think he may have set himself up for potential legal action by making his intentions so explicit.
Torturous interference is the legal term.
Yeah.
And there are lawyers in town talking about going after.
Yeah. And, the fact that that weekend had a $3 million impact on businesses downtown and workers, it's unconscionable that these people would deliberately come to our city and harm our residents and instill fear in our community. And it's also just sad that there's like a turf war going on between these two groups, which I think are, at least I think Antifa is the proxy for communists for these right-wing extremists, and they're not communists, and it's 2019, so it's just they're.
Well,
Go ahead.
We can broaden the question and ask
Sure.
you to assess the mayor, not just in this
Assess
case.
the mayor?
Yes, just in general, given your time in City Hall.
Or maybe what's he done, what's his greatest success, what is his greatest failing so far?
I mean, I'll start by saying that one of the greatest pleasures in this job is getting to know people who are only faces on TV or in the newspaper. And one of those faces is Earl Blumenauer, or Congressman Blumenauer, who I've really grown up with. He started his political career in Oregon the year I was born. And early on, we went out for a meal, and he said to me, "You have one of the best jobs in American politics. It's a Portland City Commissioner." Please note that I did not say mayor. I mean, I think mayor of Portland, Oregon is one of the hardest jobs in local politics.
You said that, or you're saying it?
I'm saying that. So he's saying,
Yep.
yeah, specifically commissioner. He made it very clear that doesn't apply to mayor. And I think about that a lot especially
Sort of
when.
interesting, given that Earl wanted to be mayor.
Well,
But, okay, go ahead, sorry.
I mean, he's seen what's happened over the last couple decades, right? And I definitely go back to that conversation on some of my hardest days. I just repeat it. You have one of the best jobs in American politics. You're lucky to be here. And it is a privilege and an honor and an incredible opportunity. But, everyone has bad days at work. It doesn't always feel that way. So I think it's a really hard job. I think that the mayor, similar to me in some ways, and I wouldn't say that we're similar in many ways, he is trying to do right by multiple communities on multiple issues, and he's often not making either side happy. And I think that's made his job really challenging. He was also elected the same night no, he wasn't. He won in the primary, but, I guess found out on election night what kind of political climate we were going to be walking into on council. He has supported tenant protections. He has worked diligently on affordable housing and homelessness issues. I think we don't always agree, and there's some, people think that there's a lot of discord on city council, but I think if you added it up, it's 5 votes on 95% of what comes through. But there are issues, especially around policing, that we don't agree on. But I'll say I'm surprised by how supportive he's been of some of my initiatives, and that we work fairly well together. And I think, one of the things that's really hard to convey to the public is the kind of deficit that we're starting with. Like, we have a massive deficit in affordable housing that is not the fault of anyone who's sitting on council today. It took decades to get there.
But when I hear you say the mayor is trying to satisfy a variety of different constituencies, and oftentimes he manages to annoy both sides,
Mm-hmm.
that says to me there's something wrong with his style.
Really?
Well, why is it that he's not able to, I mean, it's one thing if it's not even a zero-sum game, he's not making one side happy and the other unhappy, he's making both parties unhappy. So why is that? Is there something about his approach to governing?
Well, I was referring to sometimes we can't satisfy the demands of the advocates, but we
you're
can
saying-
move in that direction, or we can come up with something that we think is a fair compromise. And so the people on either end of the spectrum are not satisfied because they didn't get everything that they wanted. And I don't see that as, I mean, that's often how I operate, and I don't think that's a problem with my style. I think that's me doggedly pursuing change, policies that are going to move us in the right direction. I can't do everything I want to do in one term, and honestly, probably one lifetime.
Are you
Okay,
running
but-
for re-election? Serious question.
Yes, I am running for re-election.
I want to get back to the mayor.
Sure.
If I hear it correctly, you could be saying, look, you're aware of the fact that the mayor has unusually high negatives in this town right now.
I don't know what they are. I don't pay attention to many
Okay, I do,
polls.
and he
Okay.
does.
Okay.
Is it simply because no mayor could make this city happy? Because we are operating with such a deficit and there's such a shortage of affordable housing and we're all going to our shrinks because of Trump that no mayor could do well? Or is there something about his performance?
Well, I mean, the fact that we've had a run of one-term mayors, I think, answers your first question.
Mhm.
That it is a really hard job.
And are you endorsing him in his run for re-election?
I'm not endorsing any seats that aren't open. And that's been a rule since I've been there.
Okay.
He hasn't asked. I mean, no one has asked.
So I'm getting from you a sense that if you were the mayor's teacher and you were grading him,
I'm not going to grade the mayor, Mark.
okay, but it sounds like you give him a good grade without telling us what that letter is.
Look, when Commissioner Hardesty decided to run, she was a supporter of mine, a friend. She asked for my endorsement. Commissioner Saltzman was still planning on running, and I said no. No, because my relationship with the sitting commissioner is more valuable to me and to you and to the whole and to all the causes that we support than my endorsement to you. I will do everything I can to support you short of endorsing you. And then later that afternoon, Commissioner Saltzman announced he was not running, and I got a text that said, "How about now?" And of course the answer was yes. So my point is, I have to work with the mayor. I'm assuming that he's going to get reelected. Of course there are things I disagree with him on that I would do differently. We are extraordinarily different people, different backgrounds. He is a numbers person. I am not. He is much more fiscally conservative than I am. He is connected in ways that I'm not to strata that I am not a part of. He's a nerd. I mean, he ran on that, so I'm comfortable. Sorry, Mayor, you know you're a nerd. And I don't think he necessarily understands or appreciates some of the, issues that I think are really important, but he has come along on a lot of them despite that, and I have to give him credit for that.
Okay, that's actually a very helpful response.
Okay.
Can we ask you a few
Yeah.
quick questions?
Sure.
So there is, we got a tip that you are considering changing or ending the way the city enforces noise control violations. Anything going on there?
No.
No?
I'm,
News to you?
I mean, I'm not sure where that's coming from. I'd say this is not a conversation that's risen to the level of my office. We raised the fines, I think. I think the noise office is pretty functional. The one change that I may bring to the noise office is that I'm as concerned with protecting people's right to make noise as I am with protecting people's right to live in a peaceful environment. And so, we've had conversations with community members about how to mitigate impacts on band practice spaces, on their, we're really getting creative about how we work with community members and try to help. I mean, it's part of the arts affordability challenge as spaces dry up, people are practicing in their basement. This is kind of a little minutia, but I'm just kind of grasping at where that could have come from.
Good.
Yeah.
This is something you and I talked about like a week ago when I got you on the phone for the Vision Zero story.
I didn't mind that story so much, Aaron.
Oh, good.
I mean, it brought tears to my eyes. There's some really compelling, sorrowful stories, but I think it was pretty fair.
So I want to ask this on the record.
Yeah.
Do we need more DUI enforcement from the police bureau?
Yeah, I mean, there's just no denying that we need more enforcement, period. I've lived and driven in the city for over 30 years, and I cannot believe the flagrant disregard for laws and human life that I see almost every day. And I think there's multiple factors. Obviously, there's more people, so there's going to be more accidents. There's people from all over the country and even the world who don't understand our laws or our driving, or our weird passive driving culture. There's a lot of new infrastructure on the ground that's confusing to people, like new styles of crosswalks and striping for bikes. The Oregon Driver's Manual is not up to date, so our new generations of drivers are not getting educated properly to safely share the road. We have roadways that are very dangerous by design, which that PBOT is really steadfastly working on. Unfortunately, a number of those are not within our jurisdiction. They belong to ODOT, and ODOT's goal is to move as many vehicles, not people, as many vehicles as quickly as they can through their roads. And safety seems to be a secondary concern. So there's a lot of factors other than enforcement, but and I think you can tell I'm loath to say yes, more police, but people are dying, and drivers are seeing people breaking the law. So why shouldn't they? There's no consequences.
So would you reallocate existing police within the Bureau to traffic from other duties?
I'll say a couple things about that. Number one, the cannabis tax dollars that have gone to traffic enforcement, it was always my understanding that would be supplementing the budget, not supplanting money, which is what they actually did. Because my justification for them getting that money is that we have another intoxicant, a legal intoxicant. We know people will be consuming it and driving. Therefore, it's legitimate that we would need more enforcement. Well, we got 0 additional enforcement. I've made it really clear to the mayor and the bureau that I won't vote for that again. It's a deal breaker. I have publicly questioned the GET, which is now called the Gun Violence Reduction Task Force. I want to see the Bureau allocate resources based on data. And I believe last year 8 people died of homicide. They were not all shooting victims. And 30 plus people died on our streets due to reckless driving, mostly speeding, sometimes intoxicants. Most of those people, pedestrians in particular, were using the street legally, responsibly, obeying the rules, and they were killed. So I do question how much we're investing in gun violence reduction, although I'll say you never get credit for what doesn't happen. So I'd say I'm not comfortable right now saying I want 8 people from this task force moved to traffic enforcement, because I actually don't know enough. I would have to dig a lot deeper before I said I got into specifics. But what I'm comfortable saying now is I just want to see the rationale for how they allocate their existing resources before we give them more money. There's enforcement things we can do on the PBOT side as well.
Can you tell us if you could wave your wand and change one thing, one accomplishment? What would it be?
Wait, change one accomplishment?
No, if there's one accomplishment you could, simply by waving your wand, have happen. The thing that you are, the specific thing that...
Am I limited to the jurisdictional boundaries of Portland, Oregon, Mark? Because it would be climate change. Okay.
Yes.
It would have to be that every Portlander has a safe, stable, affordable place to live.
But I'm just wondering if there's a specific piece of code change or administrative rule or just a specific...
Maybe she doesn't need a magic wand for that.
Okay, no magic wand.
What do you want to do in the next 4 years? What's the priority piece of?
Did I answer
legislation?
Mark's question?
Well,
I thought I
You
did.
answered it in terms of your values.
Yeah.
But I'm
But
saying,
in terms of how
what would have to change?
What one
So-
thing would get closer to that than anything else you could do? Wouldn't get all the way there, but it would be the biggest step.
I think that Portlanders want to help solve this housing crisis. And I think that there are vast untapped resources that we could be activating or facilitating, whether it's church-owned properties and challenges they face with zoning laws, or, like I mentioned, average income Portlanders not being able to afford to build an ADU. We have room, we have resources, we have a lot of people who want to help, but we either are getting in their way or we're not giving them the tools they need to do so. When you look at how the shortfall we have in affordable housing is around 24,000 units, that is mind-boggling. It's really overwhelming to think that's how far behind we are. So I try to look at it in more bite-sized pieces, and for me, the ADU question is one of those bite-sized pieces. We could generate thousands of ADUs. We could give tax incentives for affordability, for accessibility, because that's another real need in the community.
Do you agree with the mayor, like something in what you were saying? The mayor recently said he thinks that homelessness remains like the priority for Portlanders, and he suggested that would be his priority in 2020 for measures that are on the ballot. Is that where you are? Like, would you prioritize like what's at this point a vague proposal around homeless services going to the ballot over what Metro is developing on transportation.
Well, you're putting me in an awkward position, Rachel, because I am on the T2020 committee.
You are indeed.
I mean, yeah, it has to be a huge priority, but the challenge is solving homelessness doesn't require just one thing that I could change with my magic wand, because there is a constant inflow of people into our homeless population, and that's related to educational inequities, that's related to mental health and drug addiction, that's related to just mass unaffordability, there's a lack of economic opportunity, there's so many factors that are contributing to this crisis, and that's why I tackled tenant protections first, is that with the relocation ordinance, that was a way to somewhat stem the tide of people entering our displaced and homeless population. And with FAIR, that will be a way to open up more housing choices for more people.
This is an off-ball question. Vera Katz once used to argue that she thought nonprofits should lose their tax-exempt status. That if you think about all the property in this town is owned by nonprofits, and you get those on the tax rolls, it would solve everything.
You're really pulling them out of the vault today,
I'm
Mark.
just wondering what you think of that, or if you've ever, you're
Well,
willing to take some bold stances.
Yeah. You know, you're not going to like my answer because it's not yes or no. I think maybe we need higher standards for who deserves that.
Who deserves to be a nonprofit?
Sure, but you know, you can be a nonprofit without having a 501c3. Maybe there's some more nuance that needs to be applied to those laws, because I don't think, I probably shouldn't say this out loud, I'm just going to say it, Scientology.
Deserves nonprofit status.
Right, that is a for-profit business.
I think you're safe saying that.
Well, but
Without
they might come for me.
And little boats.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I'd say that Vera was onto something, and I would certainly support exploring ways to exempt entities that really are for-profit businesses abusing that religious kind of designation. But I'm more interested in how we can help faith communities better serve our community members, and specifically around affordable housing, because we know that Oregon is like the first or second most unchurched state in the country. Number of these churches own a considerable amount of property. They are prevented by our zoning laws from developing housing on it, and there is a strong contingent of faith communities that want to build permanently affordable housing, and they're facing roadblocks. So I'd rather help them do more good than tax them, unless they're absolutely corrupt, in which case I think they should lose the.
Can you talk, we're just racing through stuff, can you talk quickly about your social media presence and the whole issue of, you know, what the public should have access to and what they shouldn't, and just sort of how you think about that?
It's really changed a lot the 2.5 years I've been in there. I mean, Facebook was really kind of a lifeline for me as a single parent raising a medically involved kid. I was often housebound with a sick kid, and that's how I stayed in touch with friends. That's how I got support when I needed it. It's also where I started the Shed, which ultimately led to me running city council. And I was really, I'm hesitant to admit how many hours a day I put into moderating that group, but it was a really healthy, mostly positive, engaged group of people learning together. And social media was absolutely essential in my first campaign. So I continued doing my own social media with very vague guidance from the city attorneys And at some point, this is so long ago, I'm trying to remember the whole sequence of events. Well, for instance, I posted something about a day without immigrants. Seems pretty harmless. I got trolled by right-wing lunatics from all over the country and saying terrible stuff, off-topic, personal attacks, and I felt perfectly justified in blocking these people. They were not my constituents. They weren't even Oregonians. Come to find out that I'm not allowed to block anyone on the city page, and so we unblocked everyone. I mean, that's an example of just...
Are you okay with that?
Well, the upshot is I rarely do my own social media posts, and I rarely read the comments, and I even more rarely respond because it's just such a toxic environment.
Me too.
Would you agree with the statement that Commissioner Eudaly has a more contentious relationship with the press than anybody else in City Council?
Nice time.
What?
Yeah, man.
I don't think this
You're
is
a real
manifest
buzzkill,
question.
Mark. So, I was a bookseller for 22 years, and one of the reasons I opened my store was my commitment to independent media and to journalism, and like a deep concern with the consolidation of media into a handful of multinational corporations. So I take journalism really seriously. I also take it pretty personally when I feel misrepresented in the media. And
So I'm just
I've been really...
do you think you've been misrepresented more than other members of City Commission? Do you think you take it differently?
Well, come on, Mark. I think being the youngest member of City Council, the person, prior to Commissioner Hardesty, most engaged with social media, someone who's unconventional, someone who's more accessible. I think I got more attention than Commissioner Saltzman, for instance.
Not saying much, but
Well, I think it's perfectly understandable. And the new kid on the block, and it was an upset. No one expected me to win, including me. But I don't know. Lately I have been trying to see Commissioner Eudaly as a role and a costume that I don for 50 to 70 hours a week, however much I might be working, and try to take it off when I'm not working, and to also send all of the criticism and attacks and articles I don't like with it, and just
So-
recognize that it's not very few, even though that can feel really personal, almost none of these people know me. They're often incredibly misinformed and misguided, and I can't take it personally. For my own mental health and well-being, I
again,
can't
well
take it
respected, I
personally.
want to give you an answer to the question, which is, would you agree with the statement that you have a more contentious relationship with the press than other people in City Council?
No, but that might be because I don't read much that's written about me anymore. Do you think I have a more contentious relationship
I
with
do.
the press?
Yeah.
And is it coming from the press or is it coming from me?
Well, that's what I was asking you, is whether you thought there was anything about your style, not the substance, but your style, that has created issues with the media, and maybe the very same issues with the neighborhood associations that you're so shocked they're reacting so vehemently
I wouldn't
to
say
what you think
shocked,
are
surprised.
legitimate reforms that they should
Yeah.
buy into. Is there something about Commissioner Eudaly?
You seem to be skating dangerously close to what many women hear from men, which is it's not what you're saying, it's how you say it.
If
And
you feel
trust
that's the
me.
case, you should say that.
I have experimented with this theory, and I have realized that no matter how I say it, if you don't like the message, you're not going to receive it well. In this code change case, like I said, this was not my plan or my agenda, I was very separate from the code change committee process. It's been scrutinized, for months before the final product ever came out, which is not actually the final product that will go to council. And so in the last few weeks, I've realized I'm going to have to step in and kind of take charge of this conversation, because while I didn't think that was the time for me to do so, it's gotten out ahead of us for sure.
So given that, what do you think is the public's greatest misconception
Of me?
of you? Mm-hmm.
Oh. Huh. Maybe that I don't listen.
And why do you think people have that?
Because I don't agree with them. I mean, I've learned a lot of lessons in this role. One is most people say they want change, and most people don't want to have to make change. It's my job
Okay.
to advance change.
Can I ask, and I know we're bouncing around, and I know I'm asking way more questions than I said I would.
I kind of like
You know,
that.
you said
you were going to be
I know,
silent.
I know.
I'm going to challenge you to a game of air hockey later, because that's how I take out my frustrations. And
Air hockey?
I will beat
You
you
will.
so hard.
I'll concede now. So I know you said you're not a fiscal conservative, but at the same time, I'm sure you're aware that people pay taxes and want to make sure that their money is spent well.
Mm-hmm.
You're a small business person, you know what it's like to make a payroll. I'm just
Mhm.
wondering, even though it's not necessarily your first priority, as you've been in office for however many days, are you seeing some areas in the city where you're saying, why are they wasting city money?
Yeah,
Can
and
you share that with us?
I mean, if you wouldn't mind, I'd rather have time to really think about that, and I'm willing to respond. I'm just not prepared to rattle off a list off the top of my head. I mean, what I'll say is, it's not that I am a cheapskate personally, and I'm very resourceful and creative. My office has given money back, because we haven't spent our whole budget. Civic Life has scraped together a considerable amount of money to support initiatives that we wanted to advance because we couldn't get more general fund dollars. I know how to stretch a dollar. I think people criticize the form of government because it has the siloing effect, which I don't always think is true. I see a lot of collaboration. I mean, we've collaborated with numerous bureaus, and I see a willingness there. I will say that I think there are a lot of inefficiencies because of that separation that could be eliminated. But I want to get back to you on that, because this is
We'd love to hear
an
from
interesting topic. It's one of my biggest frustrations with the budget process is that, for one thing, it's been hijacked by cuts to parks every year I've been here. And the other issue is we never actually get to the inefficiencies and redundancies. We just get this, report from the bureau director, and then the community advisors weigh in, but we don't, and it's a lot of, even that kind of surface look is a lot of information to take in. But I mean, I was hopeful about this year. It didn't work the way I had hoped, as far as the changes in the budget process. Yeah, I'll get back to you on that.
So you said a second ago that you've learned a lot of lessons. Can you tell us a mistake that you've made, a specific mistake you've made as a commissioner, and what you've learned from it?
You say coming over here today and get out of this.
No, this was fun, you guys. Contentious relationship with the press. Biggest mistake. There was a zoning issue that came before us, I want to say last year, and it would have allowed an affordable housing development to proceed in inner Northeast Portland. And the neighborhood mobilized against it. I'm trying to remember all the
Is that
details right now.
Alberta?
The Alberta Abbey.
Okay.
And I barely had the votes. I'm trying to remember how this played out. I just remember when it was.
They didn't get their zoning changed.
They didn't get their zoning changed, and the developer absolutely made some really big mistakes that made it hard for me to get it across the finish line. But after the vote happened, I realized, oh my gosh, I might have to just, I wish I had fought harder for that. And I wish I had, there's an extraordinary amount of things to learn about this job. And so land use and zoning is not an area of expertise for me, and there are members of the council who've been there a lot longer that can talk in circles around you and make you think that you don't understand an issue or you've got something wrong, and then in retrospect you realize you were right. So that's a moment, that was like a big disappointment, because that was dozens of units, affordable units that could have been built. It was a beautiful project, and it's a surface parking lot. I don't know what, they can build something, just not a project that would pencil out for affordable housing, and I regret that.
Do you have a presidential candidate you're supporting?
If the primary were today, in other words.
Yes.
Damn it, you guys. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Elizabeth Warren. Yeah. And I was a Bernie supporter last time around, and I would certainly wholeheartedly support him if he were the nominee. I'm just, at this point, more impressed with Warren.
How about Andrew Yang and his call for universal basic income?
How about who?
Andrew Yang. It's less about him than the universal basic
Yeah.
income.
That's something that I've read about, and it's been piloted in limited ways.
Mayor
And-
Sacramento was talking about.
Yeah, and I don't know that they saw the outcomes they were looking for, but I am really interested in that. I've had this thought for a long time that the working poor deserve some kind of sweat equity in this country. Like, if we're going to say it's okay for billion-dollar corporations to pay workers substandard wages, and these jobs are necessary, whether they're cleaning offices or assembling products or ringing you up at Walmart, like, those are necessary jobs, and those people deserve to have their basic needs met. And for me, that is housing, healthcare, food. And so I'm not always the biggest fan of needs-based programs, because it's just more hoops for poor people to jump through who are already extraordinarily burdened. But I do think it's an interesting conversation.
Okay.
I don't think he's going to win a presidential election on it. But.
Commissioner Mitchell's reported a number of different companies that are paying the green energy jobs tax that didn't expect to be paying it, and she had a story in yesterday's paper about how AT&T, for instance, is just passing it right along.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just curious whether you have any concern that was either a bait and switch. In other words, voters were told, hey, this will bring in $30 million and you won't pay it, to now where we see it's going to bring in at least 70, probably more. In fact, most companies appear to be passing it right along to the consumers.
I would not characterize it as bait and switch at all. But I do think there are some scenarios that weren't imagined or anticipated. Oregon is still a relatively cheap place to do business. I mean, we have low corporate taxes. And these companies, I mean, the thing that is interesting to me about passing along the cost to the consumer, did they pass along the savings to the consumer when they got their Trump tax cuts? Because this tax doesn't remotely make up for that. It was an incredible victory for a community-led initiative, and I think it's got potential to really change the face of the city. I do think there are probably some kinks to work out, and I haven't heard the latest update on that, but I think there will be some minor changes, like very limited exemptions. But I'm not, those are conversations the mayor and Commissioner Hardesty are more involved with than I am. I believe that they'll come to council for a vote at some point.
How are your relations with Commissioner Hardesty?
Good.
So we've heard otherwise.
Okay.
So I guess we have bad sources, but we've heard that there is discord. Not true.
Well, we are friends, and we are probably more likely to socialize than meet. She's keeps a very busy schedule, and she likes a lot of briefings. And there have been a couple instances where I've been really taken aback by some of her comments on the dais, and she knows that, and we've talked about it. But I'd say disagreeing about an issue or a policy or a project doesn't mean we have a contentious relationship. It means we disagree. We disagreed on something regarding PSEF, and we were hashing it out a little, and I was just like, well, it's a conversation. We'll have to have a conversation. She said, I love it when we disagree, because it's rare that we do. She's got a different style too, and yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, at least one of us who wants to get out of here.
I've got a list of a couple things that we can follow up on, but one
Universal income and
the RIP thing. So apparently now RIP is going to be a subset of housing opportunities, the Housing Opportunities Initiative. So it's subsumed by that now.
okay.
So specific naming change, but there was a subsuming sort of a situation that took place. I am going to get some numbers on the specific amount of neighborhood associations that are signed on board with
Names would be great, yeah.
names and contacts. I'll follow up with you on that. And the commissioner will spend a little bit of time thinking about, areas of the budget where maybe the city isn't spending its money properly.
Awesome.
Was there anything else that I can make sure to follow up with you guys on? I think that was
I think the only detail that I'm still fascinated by, because I'm a gossip, is who the guy was who hosted the bait and switch arts event that
that was the other thing, and Robin didn't have that, so I'm gonna need to follow up with Winta, so that's on my list too.
Yeah, Winter will know.
Yeah.
And the one last thing I'll say about neighborhood associations is we do have a lot of support for code change. It's just we weren't mobilizing that support during the code change process. And so right now it appears that the entire neighborhood system is up in arms when we do actually have a lot of vocal supporters within it. But we also have numerous community partners who are supportive of it. I made I had someone made a graphic. See, I can't take credit for where it's not deserved, but I had staff print out a photo from the mayor's press conference at Pioneer Square prior to August 17th and had her circle all the people who are already have endorsed code change effort, and it's at least a third of those people. So the support is significant, and these are not scary people that are, I'm not sure what they think. When I I deprioritized enforcement on RVs and tiny homes in driveways with some real strict parameters to keep it safe for everyone involved. We honestly had phone calls from people who thought that I had passed a rule that would allow total strangers
live
to come
on your
park their RVs or tiny homes in their driveways, and that they would have no recourse to get rid of them. I mean, that is the level of misunderstanding that I'm sometimes dealing with, and I just, I can anticipate some of the questions and fears, but
I'm gonna buy an RV.
yes, you better not park it in my driveway. Well, I'm a renter, so I can't let you do that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Aaron.
Shucks.
Yeah.
Are we, we're done?
We're done. Yeah.
All right. Nigel, you were so quiet. You're taking notes.
Somebody had.
No.
Yeah, seriously.
This is fun. I think if we did things like this.
Nobody walks out of this room and doesn't say this is fun.
Well, I didn't have much fun during the candidate.
Well,
thing.
endorsement interviews are the opposite of
Yeah, no, I
Okay.
enjoyed those.
I don't think I've ever done this as a
No.
commissioner.
No, we're gonna do it more often.
Yeah, do you guys have something against me?
No, we don't actually do
We
this.
have a contentious relationship, and it's all because of our style.